Good afternoon, everyone. I'll start by acknowledging that the land on which you're all meeting today belongs to the Kaurna people, the original custodians of the land on which the University of Adelaide's main campuses are built, and from afar, I will pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Claudia Paul, and I am from Broken Hill in far west New South Wales. I'm a First Nations Australian, a medical doctor who trained at the University of Adelaide, and currently a lab-based researcher doing a PhD on a Rhodes Scholarship in Oxford in the UK. But if someone told me 10 years ago that this is what I'd be doing, I'm not sure that I'd believe them. I want you to keep in mind that this is but one story and the experiences that have shaped my worldview, and I challenge you to consider what has shaped yours. While studying in a global pandemic and spending 10 of the last 12 months in various forms of restriction and lockdown, the irony of giving a talk on limitless change is not lost on me. To set the scene, I'm in a lounge room over 16,000 kilometres away, presenting to two phones, trying to connect at a time where there is so much disconnect. I'm a Wiradjuri woman and grew up in a small country town. I completed high school there before moving to Adelaide for medical school and moved again to work as a doctor in Newcastle. I was quick to set my sights on a career in surgery, but was abruptly confronted with the idea of studying overseas, whether this was possible and whether it even made sense to me at that point in my career. And I'm telling you this because when reflecting on my own story, there were a few key moments where the trajectory for what I thought I was capable of and what may have been possible for me was challenged and changed. And by doing so, I can highlight the perceptions that we have about Indigenous students and their achievements both in Australia and globally, and the invisible ceiling that often gets imposed upon them. In high school, I was the kid that was all right at sport, but not considered particularly academic. Generally, when people look at students from rural and remote and Indigenous backgrounds, they inflict a cap on their potential, either intentionally or unintentionally. Some changes have been made since I went through this system. However, these changes have been slow and so far deeply insufficient. Too often I hear stories, mine included, when a careers advisor or teacher has said, "You should set the bar lower," when they're hired into positions to give advice, but when you ask about how to apply to a program that you feel passionately about, you are told that this is not achievable for you. What they're actually saying is, this is not achievable for someone of your background, as an Aboriginal person or as a student from a rural or remote background. And this has a big impact, and for many can really drive self-doubt. We need to move away from a situation where someone tells you what you can't do based on what they haven't, or based on what they haven't seen people in your position do before, because of the glass ceiling. You may be surprised by this, but there are currently 360 Australians studying at Oxford. So actually, my story may not seem so unique. More importantly, there is a growing number of Indigenous Australians studying at Oxford, and that's just one university. There are comparable stories at the rival Cambridge and at Ivy League universities across the US. Despite excelling at university, unfortunately, Indigenous students are often faced with a lack of acceptance for earning their seat at the table. These same students are referred to as being resilient, as if it were a compliment, as if what they've achieved has been the exception. Resilience comes about in response to overcoming difficulty, a process of adapting in the face of adversity and sources of stress. So when we acknowledge the resilience of a person, we actually need to address the situations in which they have worked through and look for opportunities for structural change, rather than patting someone on the back for essentially coping within a system that should have better supported them. And while I'm grateful for the support I've received in getting where I am, it has also been a product of hard work, grit, and perseverance. Language is important. Avoid saying things like, "You're so resilient," "You're so lucky," "But you're so young," or "It's not fair that you." This is actually insulting given the amount of work that has gone into achieving whatever it is that person has achieved. And actually, these types of comments say a lot more about who they're coming from than about the person they're directed to. These comments imply that the speaker didn't think you were capable, or that you shouldn't be doing what you were doing, or that someone gave you a hand up rather than you having worked hard for it. So if you've ever made a comment like this, think about why you made it. Pulling a name out of a hat by random chance is luck. Being awarded a merit-based position is not luck. We need to question the biases within the systems that perpetuate inequity and inequality in education. I urge you to reflect on the privileges and the challenges that you may have experienced during your own journey, and how together we can create positive change in the systems we have benefited from. As we've been a part of these systems, we may also identify their pitfalls. Given what we know now, what can we do to create change? I want to share some important statistics that highlight what I've discussed so far. Universities Australia Indigenous Strategy Report suggested that university applications from Indigenous applicants have increased in recent years, but the disparity in degree completion between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians was 30%. This has little to do with merit, because Indigenous students are being accepted into their respective courses with the grades required to do so. But within the higher education system, they are not making it out the other end, and we need to ask why. Often, universities in Australia implemented enrolment targets for Indigenous applicants, without sufficient support structures to ensure their success throughout their program of study. But if we look at this from a global perspective, applications from Indigenous students applying to top-tier universities in the US and UK have also steadily increased in the last 10 years. Of Australians studying overseas, more than 3% are Indigenous, compared to the 1 to 2% reported for domestic Indigenous students at universities within Australia. A report by the Aurora Education Foundation found that of those applying to leading universities internationally, 94% of applicants were accepted. And of those that chose to take up that course of study, had a completion rate of 100%. So what are we doing differently in Australia to not achieve higher completion? I believe a lot of this has to do with adequate support structures, ensuring students can achieve their fullest potential by providing them with sufficient means to do so. In high school, there were programs designed to bridge the literacy and numeracy gaps, but these were not tailored and they were not opt-in. So being taken out of class for reading or maths or writing, for me, actually did more harm than good. At 14 or 15 years old, I had to really advocate out of a situation that was supposedly designed to better support my learning. It is more important to individualize support around learning by asking what the student might need, rather than approaching all students with a blanket solution. Attending my physics or chemistry class was far more beneficial than taking me out of class for a reading group, ultimately putting me in a position where I needed to then catch up on the coursework I'd missed as a result. For the past decade, I've accepted opportunities that presented themselves and then tried to just adapt to these new situations, sometimes gracefully, and other times the swan above water who was paddling like crazy under the surface. So I'll fast forward to my time in the UK, in my first year at Oxford, where I studied a Masters of International Health and Tropical Medicine. I focused and was passionate about understanding healthcare delivery in under-resourced areas, and the changes required in these settings to improve health outcomes. During my time, it was the conversations that occurred outside of the classroom rather than within it. And these inspired and challenged me, resulted in both rich discussion and debate. And although my focus when returning to Australia is addressing the disparity in surgical outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, there is a lot that can be learnt from conversations regarding other population groups, but across all corners of the globe. The greatest benefit that I had here is for being encouraged to explore beyond my degree program, to lean into conversations that I was less familiar. And this can have a really profound impact on our own work. It is only here that I've been really able to appreciate its importance. And I am now in my third year at Oxford, and honestly, I feel like less of imposter here than I ever did in medical school. Here, I'm not othered the same way I was there. In my first days, I wasn't asked, "Where are you from?" in a way that suggested I didn't belong. It didn't matter if I grew up in the country or if I didn't attend private school or that I didn't have doctors as parents. And I realised that the story that was being written for me at 18 years old was all the things that I wasn't or didn't have, rather than what I did. We are all brainwashed to fear failure. Before my Rhodes application, my main thought was, what if I don't get it? I'm sure we've all had a similar thought when applying to uni or jobs or scholarships. But reflecting on this, what I should have been giving more thought to was, what if I do? In the UK, we finally turned a corner of what we all hope is the third and final lockdown for this pandemic. And while Australia's experience of the pandemic has been strikingly different to that of the UK, I hope some commonalities prevail. We've been forced to slow down. We've had to be honest with ourselves, more intent in our interactions, and question more deeply the work that we do and what it is that we want to be doing. The pandemic has pushed us to work in ways that we would not have previously thought normal, where we enter a time of hybrid learning and working and the balance between volume versus value. While this pandemic stopped innumerable things from happening, there was still plenty happening. And we can take forward our new ways of working and learning that complement the more traditional working practices. So I'll leave you with this. Firstly, say yes to things and then work out how you're going to get them done. Saying yes to opportunities. You might just find yourself doing a TEDx talk to an audience of n equals 0 from your lounge room. Find what drives your intrinsic motivation. And lastly, remember, there are different paths to the same destination. Thank you.